Hello, welcome to our panel discussion today. Thank you for joining us. Our topic today is manager development and utilizing data to facilitate change. Today's webinar is hosted by Mary Fink, who is Senior Vice President here at Work Institute, and we're going to pass it over to her. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, William. I'd like to welcome everybody that's with us, and I'd especially like to thank our guests today, Emily Moses and John Fitzgerald. Emily is the founder of Go Make Your Mark, where she currently uses tailored personal-centered solutions to help leaders, teams, and organizations tap into their innate power to achieve outcomes that only they can offer. Prior to that, she has been CHRO in a number of organizations, or Chief People Officer, I guess was your last title. And I have known Emily for a number of years, and I know that she is the real deal when it comes to taking care of people in the organization and trying to get them the information that they need to do the best job that they can. John Fitzgerald is currently working to curate and implement the church pension organization's corporate learning catalog, overseeing learning and performance management systems, and collaborating with leaders, managers, and employees to tailor development programs to individual and organizations. John began in the tech world and then decided to move over to the human world. And I have also worked with John for a number of years and found that they are both, I have great respect for both of these individuals for a number of years and how they perform their roles. So I want to talk about the importance of targeting training and development to the greatest impact to those who have the training or take the training. I'll start by asking each of you how you go about making sure that you're training managers to the right things. There's a wide variety or a great array of things that are offered today. And sometimes I've had someone call me and say, we just need more about communication. So how do I know, or how do you know that you're choosing the right thing and that you're going to have the greatest impact? And Emily, you can start.
Sure. So when it comes to training, I think we all know how important it is to be set up for success in your role, and it starts with the proper training. So I would just say, obviously, research, but others in the industry, I always try to have that network of asking, what are you using? These are the top three I would suggest, but let's bounce that off one another. And obviously, I know we're going to dive more into data, but the research of picking the right tool, because I have found what may work at one organization is not what's best for another, depending on the team, the business goals and objectives. So really tailoring it to your people and making sure that fits the culture.
And to do that, you have to know your people, don't you?
You do.
And I preach that all the time, that there is no substitute for knowing the people that you're working with.
It's so true.
John, what would you say?
Well, I would say, yeah, there's a couple of different sources of information. So not so much data, but a lot of conversations with people at the company. We're a fairly small company, so it's easier to have a personal relationship with most people of some sort. And so we get a lot of direct feedback that way. We also talk a lot about the needs of the organization. So in our case, learning is under the whole organizational development umbrella as part of HR. And we participate in a lot of different organizational health initiatives. So as far as the learning is concerned, there's Tressa Violetto is one of our HR business partners, and she and I work together a lot on figuring out what the training should look like. So we have a lot of one-on-one conversations, but we also have some data. So one asset we do have at our company is a research department. And they do a lot of work surveying our client, which is the Episcopal Church. So we essentially provide retirements, insurance, and other financial and different benefits to the Episcopal Church. So they do a lot of work finding out what the needs of our client are, but they also do internal surveys to find out what the needs are going on here. So we make a lot of use of the engagement surveys, especially that they do for us.
All right. And you do those yearly, annually?
We do. I think they do them twice a year now.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And they're always able to sort of configure and cut and slice the data into really helpful information that we can target. So it's led us to realize that, certain areas need more of change management. There are other areas where we need to focus on empathy of leaders. So, we get a lot of data that really helps us figure out what shape the learning should take.
Right. So how do you know you're getting the results that you want? How do you know that it's having the impact that you want it to have?
John, yeah.
Yeah, well, from a couple of things. One of them is the engagement survey. So now, obviously, engagement has a lot to do with, other than just training. And like I said, training is just a part of learning and organizational development. But there are certain things that we do specifically try to attack by certain training programs. And so we sometimes do see a bump happening there. And then we do directly survey the people who take our courses. So, we have evaluations in the research department. They're a little bit different because obviously the needs of a training department are going to be a little bit different needs than engagement surveys for the whole company. So they've, created some stuff for us that we use. So, and like I said, between those two sources of real data and then actual one-on-one conversations.
Great. Thank you. Emily.
Yeah. So similarly to John, yes, I'm a huge fan of engagement surveys, and typically I've set up a cyclical calendar where everything runs off of a quarterly touch base, whether it's a connection conversation, and that is one-on-one with your leader, that leader quality. So what turnover are we seeing? And that's usually a red flag. I always say, look at your leader and that turnover and where that's coming from. And then another item is more focused talent management, is a talent action plan. So where are there skill gaps that we're seeing that we want to specifically hire for, or we're going to train internally to fill in for that as the company continues to grow? So I've called a talent action plan, and that seemed to be very helpful to leaders and even back to the C-suite so that they understand who are our top performers, who are the best leaders, what are they doing that we need to start to learn from.
Right. Do you both do exit interviews?
We do. Yeah, we do. I don't, sometimes that may not be something we make as much use of as we could, but we do them. And like Emily, we also just finished up our annual performance appraisal process. Mm-hmm. So coming out of that, that's another way that we get a view of where the skill gaps are and what people are really going to need for continued success.
Right. Right.
And that reminds me too, John, I know we probably both the 360 process, and Mary, you've even helped with some of those in addition to exit interviews. It's interesting the size company you are. If you're smaller and you have that business partner that can do the live questionnaire, and then I've been at larger organizations where it's more of that survey that you ask them to complete. And we've also partnered with the Work Institute to do that because we found maybe they're not telling us as much as they would a third party to really dig into some of that information because they want to remain anonymous.
Right. And I know that exit interviews give us information that has happened to people, that has happened as a result of people leaving. And we hear about the issues that they had. We don't always hear about them in real time. So data takes a lot of forms. What have you found to provide you with the best information? We talked about exit interviews. There are stay interviews. You talked about engagement surveys. What do you find most successful for knowing what employees need, and what other things are there? I mean, there's a lot of ways to get data. It isn't just in surveys. So talk to me a little bit about how you handle that. John, we'll start with you.
Okay, sure. Well, and I will say that there's one thing about the character of this company that is a lot different than what a lot of other companies deal with, is that our attrition rates are, I think most people call them ridiculously low. We don't, as far as exit interviews, we don't have a lot of people. I mean, it happens with everybody, but we do not have a lot of people leaving because they're dissatisfied. Occasionally, we do have people leaving for other job opportunities, but I would say we have a much greater percentage of people who leave because they're retiring. but to get, I'm
Lucky
sorry.
you.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And sorry, what your exact question again?
Was what other forms of data do you get?
Oh,
Other,
right,
I know
right, yeah.
you do a lot of one-on-ones, you do a lot of conversations, you have your performance eval, but most of the time I find performance evaluation or appraisals are more formal, and we don't always get the kind of information that we're looking for in this situation there. We're talking about other things. And
Yeah.
to be honest, people usually dread them, although they're not usually negative all the time, but people usually dread them. So they come in with a different mindset than they would into a conversation where you're offering your help or trying to find out what help they need.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that we've started instituting in the last couple of years is really pushing on encouraging managers and employees to have regular one-on-one meetings. And we also have a tool in our learning and performance management system that helps people document and set up agendas for their one-on-one meetings. And it's having something people can actually put their hands on is having an effect. Excuse me. We are seeing more and more of these regular one-on-one meetings, and it's a great opportunity for the skill needs to bubble up. So, I think there's a lot of things that if you don't have those regular manager and employee conversations, that can easily get missed. But if you're having them, eventually certain issues are going to come up. And if they're of a repetitive nature, it's going to be, okay, this is something we can actually get our hands on and figure out how to attack.
Right. We need to pay some attention to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emily.
Yeah. So I'll do a plug for Paylocity. There's many HRIS systems. I have been a huge fan of Paylocity. I've implemented it twice. And they have a data analytics section strictly for the people piece. And I use that heavily, whether it's a monthly report back to the leadership team to not only look at turnover, but also the diversity metrics, and then tenure and any internal promotions we've done, that's important. Also looking at pay across to make sure, are we paying competitively? Because while that isn't top on the list, it is a trigger for turnover and that employee engagement and retention. So that's helpful. And then I love John's point on the one-on-one. So you can set up the one-on-one form in Paylocity. And I would say, there is the data and the analytics and the systems piece, but also with that, like I know, Mary, you and I share the same value, is people also know if you're coming to that meeting truly listening. It's their one-on-one. And as a leader, are you distracted? Are you making eye contact? Are you fully engaged in that one-on-one? Because it matters. It also matters that you not cancel, that you reschedule, because what that shows is, am I important? Does this meeting matter?
Right. Exactly. So we talk about the importance of relationships and how we nurture those relationships. I've had a lot of calls recently from organizations that were concerned that, and I have one particular client that I'm working with that has people come to the organization maybe as a first job, maybe from a situation where they haven't had to be in a professional environment. And so it's so odd to me that people just don't know what a work day is like. They don't, those little things like coming to work at all or coming on time, how to challenge professionally or courteously or respectfully, not to call the CEO by his first name the first day that you're there. And that has been something that we have developed a class around early career professionalism so that we can help some of those folks. We have some people that hire people that have not been in the work world for a while, coming back maybe from raising their family, and they just don't know that. And that's a different kind of training than some of the other things that we talk about. And I think it does make a difference if we can get onto some of those issues early, because it helps with retention, and retention being such an issue these days. I know, Emily, that you've come from 2 organizations that had a lot of retention issues. And so what were you doing to try to modify that to the extent that you could.
Yeah, another piece that I think comes to mind is a stay interview, so
Right.
getting ahead of it, not waiting for the exit interview to know, like really honing in if you're seeing higher turnover within certain teams, doing the stay interview and making sure those questions are really probing on the right reasons. That was extremely helpful for us to get ahead of it. And then the other thing, when you were talking, Mary, about those that are returning to work, or maybe this is their first corporate or real world experience in an organization, I wrote down the word confidence. Because sometimes that ego, if you have the imposter syndrome, or hey, I haven't worked in 10 years, the technology's different, I'm a little uncomfortable. So however you can make that learning easy, and as we all know, meeting them where they are, to let them know we have a plan, you were selected for a reason, this is what our team is here for. Just to further build that confidence so that they can shine in their role to be, as we say, operating at highest and best self.
Right. And I think a lot of times training is more about that than we think. I know in some of the custom programs that we offer, people will tell us that the content was great. I learned a lot. I do things a lot differently than I used to do. But what was really important to me was having a group of people that I got to know really well and building my confidence in doing those things in a better way. So I think that that's a really important point.
And that you're not alone, that we're all feeling it,
Right.
and
Exactly.
as we would say in many of your classes, Mary, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, that's how you're growing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I know in some of our organizational open enrollment programs, we have people that had classes 10 years ago and they still stay in touch. So there's a peer getting to know you kind of thing, especially with those that come from different organizations that people just hang on to for a long time. So I think that's an added benefit of some of those programs. John, anything that you would like to add about retention, even though you don't have a lot of issues with it?
Well, actually, I can speak a little bit about it at a company that I used to work for.
Okay.
And it was a network of health clubs. And when we first came in as the training department, I was part of like when they were evolving the training department from what it had been to what they wanted it to be. And it was really churn them and burn them. From the personal trainers to the salespeople in the clubs to the club managers, they, it was almost taken for granted that they weren't going to stay around long enough to learn anything. So why bother training them? So
Wow.
so there was a major investment in training. And speaking of data, I mean, we saw, there was that camaraderie. We got people from different clubs together, and so club managers were able to sort of trade skills and talk about the issues. Oh, I have this issue here, but we don't have it over there, and things like that. But we invested in their training, and salespeople got better at their jobs. The people who cleaned the clubs got much better at their jobs because there had been no real training in place for that. It was really hit and miss. And then, of course, you saw a big data change with the customer satisfaction and the decrease in cancellations. So, again, completely different environment from what I'm in now. But that was something where we could directly see changes in data based on what we were doing.
Yeah,
right.
I love that, John, because it touches on why culture matters. Are you living those values and purpose? Because not only do you feel it internally, your clients and customers can see that too. They know if you're different because everyone's, yep.
And everyone who worked in the clubs, was before they really had been feeling like, nobody cares. I'm going to be out of here as soon as I can anyway. They actually felt like, oh, maybe they want me to stick around, which just was a complete attitude change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And speaking of culture, it's another thing that we don't usually talk about as a class, but it's a part of everything that we do because as we know, the culture that we create is one that we can be intentional about, or we can just let it happen the way it happens. And that doesn't usually go to the best place. So if we're intentional about creating a good culture, and I know, John, that you have a great culture there at CPG, and I know that you will build a good culture, Emily, with your new company. But talk to me a little bit about the importance of that. Either,
Well,
John.
yeah, for us, it is crucial. I mean, I think that when you walk in here and people who've come here to visit as vendors or whatever have commented that the atmosphere is just different than most corporate environments. You know, we do tend to be a little bit old fashioned. I mean, in terms of like, it's only been about 4 years since we went to business casual. Like you normally would have seen me in a suit and tie before then. So we can be a little old school that way, but it's a very, for the most part, there's definitely a concept of treating people well, whether they're, you know, your manager, your employees, or your colleagues and peers. And I, you know, part of that is that is something that is monitored in our engagement surveys. You know, engagement and culture, they do have some questions that really give us a cluster of data around that. So, you know, I think we are sort of, some people would say we're generally a nice organization, but you know, you can't just, being nice isn't the be all and end all of culture. And
Right.
there are a lot of data points, I know, that in our engagement surveys that really very quite intentionally keep tabs on how people are feeling about that and whether there need to be any adjustments in, you know, again, training or in management styles, or if there's something particular that level leadership needs to start modeling. So that's very helpful to us in training, but also in the overall, again, learning and organizational development stage.
Right. And as an outsider in your organization, and I've been to your offices before, I can attest to it is a very welcoming and inclusive culture there. I don't think I passed anyone that didn't speak, or if I had a question, they answered it, or if I looked lost, they helped me get to where I needed to get to. So you can feel it whether you walk into a doctor's office or a retail establishment or just a business office, you can tell almost immediately what the culture is.
Yeah, Marion, I always think of sports teams. You know, they definitely have a culture, and it starts with the head coach, and it's very much CEO led. That is no pressure to all the CEOs, but it does, they lead first. And I think with that, you know, culture, it can be a buzzword, but it's just that. It's what are we being intentional about? Because there's words and then action. And that's also with the engagement surveys. If you ask for feedback, get ready to take action, because they're not going to keep giving it to you if they don't see your hey, you asked, but you're not listening. You're not showing us that it matters.
Right. And I can't say yes to everything that is suggested, but I can certainly get back with you and let you know. If the answer is no, I can tell you that, and I can tell you why it is.
We can talk about it.
We can talk about it. And that doesn't mean it can't ever happen. So we've talked most of our time about data. I want to talk a little bit now about facilitated learning, because I know a lot of organizations, particularly during the pandemic, leaned on a lot of online classes. And online, I think, is okay if it's live. If it's just a recording, I have a limited time that I can pay attention to something like that. And I think that we don't always get the best result from that. So do you provide the opportunity for facilitated learning, and what does it look like in your organization?
Yeah.
Well, or John?
Sure, either way. And I'll just real quick speak to, because now what Leave Your Mark is doing, we offer the fractional HR leadership support and then recruiting. And so, Mary, there's so much of this too that starts with the hiring process.
Exactly.
But to answer your question, I think what I always try to recommend, because now there's so many companies that are remote first, is the blended. So realizing financially, you may not always bring everyone together live, but you at least need to do some of that, because to your point, if you're going to build this community, build the commitment, there's so much more that happens in person. But then also realizing there's a lot now with technology that can be done virtually, but having some follow-up, some testing, you know, to understand, is it being retained?
Right. Some continuity, so that it isn't just a good day out of the office. that I have an accountability to apply what I've learned, that there's going to be some ongoing assignment or follow-up or whatever it is. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, we sort of have made a transition. It used to be our learning used to be 100% in person. We have these great learning conference rooms and things here. And the problem with that was we do have a good chunk of telecommuters as well as some people who work in a Vermont office. And it was hard to include them in training. It basically involved a trip. Hotel rooms in New York are not cheap. And, there's the inconvenience of travel and all of that. So basically people got training when they could manage to come into New York, and we'd try to schedule some classes around that. And then we went more to a hybrid learning, which I would say that we were, doing pretty good at putting hybrid learning together when COVID hit. And of course, then everything got remote.
Right.
And one of the things that we discovered is that it just did a much better job of including people who were not in the New York office. I would say probably about maybe a little less than 2/3. I don't know the statistics right offhand, but I'd say a little less than 2/3 of the people are probably in the New York office. So, it sort of was our opportunity to see the way to include them. However, there are people who really do want to get back to some in-person learning. So I think that's something we're evolving on, or working on, how to really get back to a hybrid, not just a hybrid learning, but a hybrid learning that really accommodates both of those needs.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think, John, to that point, what we noticed in some of those stay interviews, exit interviews, if they did not see someone within 6 months, they started to feel like, I'm not sure I even fit in here. So if a recruiter calls or an organization seems appealing, I'm more likely to go, versus if we try to get together even twice a year, they at least had that connection to the broader organization.
I'm afraid that's all the time that we have. I've enjoyed our conversation. And now we're going to hear from my colleague, Catherine Barron, who's going to share some information about some upcoming events. So thank you so much for joining me. John, I'll be looking forward to coming to New York again. If you're going to do some in-person, I love in-person. I think it makes a huge difference. So Catherine. I can't hear you. Can you all hear her?
No.
Yeah, we're still unable to hear.
Right.
I got the 1 second.
Right.
I am so sorry. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
I am so sorry about that. This is Catherine from Work Institute, and I just wanted to reiterate a couple of the key takeaways. First, say thank you so much to Mary and to Emily and to John for facilitating this conversation, and just highlight a couple of key takeaways that I had from that call. Primarily, how important it is to utilize all of the key touch points at the life cycle of your employee to get, and all of that data to shape the areas of training and identify skills gaps, as well as to come to these meetings, whether they're one-on-ones or facilitated training, fully engaged. I think those were really awesome takeaways that I really appreciated. And I just want to underscore that here at Work Institute, we are leaders in leadership development that offer fully facilitated learning processes to help organizations either through our large-scale programs or within your program. So if you're on this call and you're wondering how to take the next steps or where you can grow, please, I'm going to put a link in the chat in a moment. Please click on that link, schedule a meeting to meet with me. I will be on camera for that meeting. Schedule a meeting to meet with me or someone else from our team, one of our other advisors, to talk about what could work best for your company. The last thing I want to note is that we have a minimum of 2 open enrollment for every year for our Emerging Leaders program through Work Institute that we are actually enrolling for now. Again, the link in the chat in a second will allow you to sign up to learn more about that. And if you're local to Nashville, in the Nashville area, on April 25th, we'll be having an in-person retention report being released to talk about the trends we are seeing nationwide in the workplace. So thank you so much for all of your time today. Again, I'm going to turn it over to William to say I'm going to say goodbye here. And thank you so much for all of your time. I really appreciate it. And I will be putting that link in the chat in just one moment.
I don't know if William is coming back or not, but I will thank everybody. Thank you for your attention, and hopefully we will see you on some future webinars. Thank you so much. Thanks, Emily and John.
Thank you, Mary.
Yes, thanks, Mary.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.